Coming up next,
Ed Kalegi and Karen Richmond. This is Chatterbinge.
What if you got to do everything in your life twice? It is the foundation of our next guest's latest novel, a love story that dares to explore how our unchecked desires might mean losing what we've had all along. A Good Morning America book club pick and an instant New York Times bestseller. The new book is Twice. His books have collectively sold 42 million copies in 48 languages worldwide. It is great to say hello to Mitch Albom. Mitch, welcome to Chatterbinge.
Thank you, Ed.
Mitch, I enjoyed this so much, and one of the reasons why is because there is such a distinct feel and pacing with each of your books, and each is very unique in its own way. So let me begin here. Mitch, if you would, tell us a bit about Twice and introduce us to Alfie Logan.
So Alfie is a character who, when he's 8 years old, discovers that he has the magical ability to do everything in his life twice. But he has to live with the consequences of his second try. There's no going back. And he spends his early years as a kid and adolescent fixing, the simple mistakes and making the basketball shot that he missed or taking back the embarrassing comment he made in front of his friends or girls. And then when he becomes a man, he discovers that there's one caveat to this power. It doesn't work with love. In fact, it's kind of the opposite. If somebody loves you and you decide you want to go back in time and try somebody else, then that first person can never love you again. They'll be in the world, you can talk to them, but they can never feel the same way that they felt. And of course, at some point, having found the perfect person and he's married, and then he gets tempted and something happens and he has to make a very fateful decision about whether he's going to use this power to explore that. So it's an exploration about be careful what you wish for, and particularly in love. What I enjoyed most about Twice is that in addition to being entertained by the story itself, Mitch, I found it to be quite an introspective exercise. And what I mean by that is that I dare anyone who reads Twice not to succumb to the urge to sort of re-rack all of those internal mental VHS tapes and those Super 8 movies that we each store in the back rooms of our mind about relationships, about people that we knew, and wonder which ones we would take that chance with. It is a wonderful way to read a book. So for you as a writer, what is the biggest challenge in writing not only to entertain a reader, but almost subliminally inspire them to truly think in a very personal way? Well, it's a really interesting question, and I think the first way you do it is you write in a very personal way, because it'll ring true that way. So a lot of the things that Alfie makes mistakes on and goes back and does, I did. There's an embarrassing scene when he's like 11 years old. He goes to a makeout party, first one, and they go in the closet. They play one of those little kissing games, and it's so dark that he can't see, and he bangs his nose against the girl's nose that he's in there with. And that actually happened to me, and it was so embarrassing that we just didn't do anything, and then when we came out, it was so obvious that we didn't do anything, and all the other kids made fun of us. And, so you use those kind of experiences in your life because you know that they'll ring true, but you begin with a premise that I want to write about something that people are thinking about. And that's the difference between me and I guess, a lot of other writers who think plot first, or character first, or thriller first, or murder first, or whatever. And they're all great, and I'm not saying it in a critical way. But I've always approached my books as, well, what's the theme that I want people to think about? And then I create a story, not the other way around. It makes me think about something that someone said to me about you a few years ago. I remember having a conversation, and we were talking about some of your books and your writing. And the person said, Mitch Albom articulates the human condition better than almost anyone else who is writing today. And I agree with that. So let's assume the hypothesis for our conversation. So where does that come from? That ability to be able to go back and think of yourself at 11 years old and take that and relate that in a contemporary way to your writing. Where does that articulation emanate from within you? Probably from Tuesdays with Morrie. I led quite a different life prior to Tuesdays with Morrie. I was a very gung-ho sports writer, sports broadcaster. I was on ESPN. I wrote a newspaper column, and I was, working 100 hours a week just diving into sports and trying to, get a bigger name and accomplish more. And then I spent, every Tuesday with my dying professor as he was dying from Lou Gehrig's disease, and I wrote a book to try to pay his medical bills. I wasn't trying to make a career. He needed his bills paid, and I'd never really done anything up to that point in my life that was just for somebody else. And I did that, we were able to find one publisher willing to publish it. Most people didn't want it, but we found one, and they said, they'd give us just enough money to pay his bills. I gave it to him. I wrote this book, spent a year writing a book that I didn't think was going to have anything to do with my life or career or whatever. I just did it because it was the right thing to do. And then all of a sudden, that book became something that nobody could have predicted, and all my conversations, Ed, began to be about loss and the meaning of life and regret and people dying in your family. And so, my world became listening to people tell me stories about grief and loss and hope and inspiration. And those things started to swirl around in my head far more than sports. And when it came time to write another book, that's what I wanted to write about. I wrote a book called The 5 People You Meet in Heaven, but it was basically about people who feel that their life is meaningless. And I wanted to write a book that showed there's no such thing as a meaningless life. And I learned that from all those conversations after Tuesdays with Morrie. So I would say everything that I've done since came about from that sort of life-changing experience of sitting alongside a man who was dying week after week and finding out what's really important once you know you're going to die.
The way you wrote Tuesdays with Morrie, I remember when I first read it, it made me think back to the Mitch Albom I thought I knew. And I knew you from Sunday morning sitting with Dick Schaap talking on ESPN. That's how I first learned about you and your years of working and covering and writing about sports. If I were to say that needing to write so vividly about something that in a snapshot, such as sports, can contain such extreme emotion, physicality, tension, struggle, reward, exuberance, even absurdity at times. If I were to say that your ability to convey all of that in a literary sense better prepared you to write about the overall human experience as you did in Tuesdays with Morrie, and obviously as you do now, especially in Twice, would I be wrong about that?
No, I think it's a pretty astute observation. I'd add that when you write sports, there is so much else going on, as you pointed out. And by the way, a lot of really great writers, Hemingway and Faulkner and many others, started writing sports, or sporting events. So Norman Mailer, there's a reason that writers are attracted to sports because of all the wonderful adjectives that you just laid out there. And when you do that, you understand that you can get out of the way because it's already so much going on. And I think the best thing I did with Tuesdays with Morrie was get out of the way and not overwrite and not write about, and now let me tell you what this means with these flowery sentences and poetic sentences about death. It was enough. What was happening was enough. And, when Morrie would take my hand and say something very simple and very poignant, I didn't know how to add poetic sentences onto it because being a sports writer, you just kind of, if I can just describe what's going on here, it'll be enough. And I think that it helped me. It's one of the reasons the book was so short, but it also helped my writing. And it's the way that I write to this day. I feel like if you can contain the human emotion within the story and the characters, you don't need to overdo it. You don't need to throw 1,000 sentences at it, and use words that nobody understands.
Right.
Simpler is better.
What's the best part about being a writer?
Oh my, there's so many great things about it. There's no set hours.
Yeah.
There's no set office. I can write on a beach. I can write in a closet. I've sat against airport walls and written. You get to live in your head. And that is, of course, one of the drawbacks if you're married or if you have children, because they're always trying to get you out of your head. When I came down here to talk to you, my little girl, I have a little 3.5-year-old, and she said, "Daddy, where are you going?" And I said, "Well, I have to go downstairs to talk to people." And she, "Okay, I'll see you when you come up, because she knows already, like, okay, when Daddy goes off to think, he disappears. I still remember the very, very first thing I ever wrote was for a little weekly newspaper that was free in Queens, New York, and it was about parking meters. And the first assignment I ever had, and I still remember it because I saw my name and I saw the words that I had written on print, and it just gives you this feeling like I created that, I made it. And somewhere that's going to always live forever, in a file or somewhere, or now as books on a shelf. So it's no one's ever really asked me that, Ed. It's funny, you'd think that someone would have asked you what's the best part about being a writer, but that's why I probably answered too long.
No, I love that. And I love how you invoked your daughter, and I love that. Daddy, where are you going? And now we know in a few years, when you come back on the show to talk about your book, Where Daddy Goes Off to Think, we'll understand where that came from. You already answered a question from a future interview. Well, once again, the new novel is Twice. It is published by Harper. It is available now, and it makes a wonderful holiday gift. Mitch Albom, you are a bucket list guy for me. Thank you so much for joining us here on Chatterbinge.
It's been a pleasure, Ed. Thank you so much.
I'm Ed Kalegi.
3, 2, 1.
Great conversations happen here. Chatterbinge.
And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you can always catch our best guest conversations and segments right here on the YouTube home of Chatterbinge.